The garage door slid up at my electronic command. I blinked in surprise. Nowhere to park in my own garage. My wife's silver BMW sat in her spot to the left, but a shiny red F-150 pickup was parked in my spot to the right. Well. I've had my suspicions about my wife Bev before. I guess now I have an answer. I recognized the truck as Ted's. He and his wife Charlie moved into a new house about a mile from here, a year and a half ago or so. Ted is a junior partner at Bev's parents' law firm and has been working with them for about 8 years. He was showing off his new truck to a few of us at a party at Bev's parents' house last week. It's deer season now, and almost every guy in town is packing up and heading out to deer camp for the entire 2-week season. It's been a tradition in this part of the South for as long as anyone can remember. Some wives and daughters go too, but it's mostly a guy's thing, like a friend's father's sons kind of deal. My wife's a girly girl. No interest in roughing it in the woods overnight, let alone for 2 weeks. I belong to the hunting club east of town with buddies from work, and Ted belongs to the club west of town with a bunch of lawyers. A sly, blood-sucking bunch I'm happy to avoid. The season starts tomorrow morning, and today at noon, I headed out to the hunting camp to get ready. Bev expects me to be gone for the full 2 weeks, like any other guy in town. Charlie undoubtedly expects Ted to be at his camp for 2 weeks too. So Bev just opens the garage door, Ted pulls in either before dawn or after dusk, Bev closes the door, and voila, you have the perfect setup for a clandestine affair. Unsuspecting spouses have no clue about the hot romance happening behind closed doors. The fly in the ointment of these adulterous lovebirds is that around 6 o'clock today, I started feeling sick. I decided to make the 2-hour trip home just in case something happened to me. I'd prefer to recover from the flu or whatever it is in the comfort of home under the watchful eye of my devoted wife, rather than suffer through it alone in the woods. That's the only reason I ended up here at 8 in the evening, to discover this clever little love nest. Back in civilization, I grabbed some meds at the pharmacy and now felt a bit better, at least until my discovery. I guess I'm not surprised by Bev's infidelity. She's so self-absorbed, almost narcissistic, just like her mother. She's stunning and flirtatious, men desire her, and she has the opportunity to stray given my frequent trips. All it takes is giving the husband a break. There's no point in getting upset or worried. Spousal infidelity is an age-old story. They didn't include a warning about adultery in the 10 Commandments 2,500 years ago because it was a new concept. And infidelity isn't exclusive to one gender, after all. For a romance to work properly, it takes 2. Maybe it would be amusing to walk in, catch Ted in the act and make a scene, but ultimately it won't serve any purpose. Now I have precise information about my wife's affair. The question is, how best to use it to my advantage. I switch off the truck's headlights, close the garage door, and slip away. The house sits on a 3-acre plot at the end of a cul-de-sac. There's a large neighborhood lake behind the house with a marshy stream spilling from the lake's dam and running through a ravine along the far side of my property, then meandering across the street in front of the house. It leaves my house quite secluded. The garage is at the far end of the house, by the ravine. It's doubtful that any adulterous lovers or nosy neighbors noticed my arrival or departure. Though I belong to the hunting camp, I also enjoy my solitude. I bought a 5-acre plot of land adjoining the camp. My plot includes a pond and a small farmhouse with 2 bedrooms where I live. I hunt on club-leased land and might venture up to the main club area to shoot with the guys and maybe have a beer. But overall, I relish my secluded time at the farmhouse for my 2-week escape from the world. In the summer, Bev and some of her friends come out to swim in the pond and sunbathe. I get roped into making cocktails for the bathing beauties and grilling catfish for lunch. It's a pleasant duty, as there's quite a bit of exposed female charm basking in the sun out here. Given the remoteness of the pond, the girls sometimes get rather bold in what they expose to Helios's rays, which of course I don't mind at all. Well, tonight I've got a 2-hour trip back to the hunting camp and the farmhouse to ponder my predicament and plan my course of action. In high school, I was an honor student and a good baseball player. My family had long military traditions, and I wanted to attend one of the U.S. military academies, either West Point or the Citadel. But Dad was very ill, so I accepted a baseball scholarship to a state university just 50 miles from home. While I excelled in high school and American Legion baseball, college was a big step up. I played, but I was just solid, a very reliable player, not a star. Probably didn't help that I was an engineering major with a heavy course load. I went as far as I could with baseball, but excelled more in my studies. It was the Vietnam era, so I planned to do my part and joined an Army ROTC unit. After college, I went into the Army as a second lieutenant in the infantry. 9 months later, I was in the Mekong Delta with the 9th Infantry Division. For 2 months, I was the battalion S3 assistant. Then I was assigned as a rifle platoon leader. Turns out, I had a knack for leading men in battle, accomplishing the mission, killing the enemy, and ensuring the safety of my people as much as possible. Once I was wounded by grenade fragments in my left hand and back. The wounds were minor, nothing compared to what some poor souls endured. I was back in the field within 10 days, and I felt ashamed to receive a Purple Heart for those minor wounds, considering what some other guys went through. After my tour in Vietnam, I was assigned to Fort Benning to train soldiers who were going to war. After completing my service obligations, I used my GI Bill to earn a master's degree in engineering at Texas A&M University. This, along with my veterans' preferences, led me to work at NASA's laboratory in my hometown where Bev was. Bev was a war widow during the Vietnam War. Her husband was a graduate of the Air Force Academy, who was shot down and killed over North Vietnam on his 12th mission. His body was never found. She and Bev were married for 18 months. Mary, a female scientist in my group, went to college with Bev and introduced me to her at a party. Mary was a born matchmaker, and she begged me to ask Bev out. I was smitten from the start. Bev was a stunning beauty, bright and flirtatious, but she was way out of my league. I was never Romeo and only casually dated with little success. I never had a serious girlfriend, too busy with baseball, studies, or military service to indulge in such civilized matters. Yet Bev warmly responded to my courtship, though I'm sure she found my clumsy attempts amusing. 5 months later, we were married. That was 4 years ago. I always wondered why such a beauty as Bev would pay attention to me, let alone marry me. Louise, the elderly secretary at work, gave me some insight, saying, "John, around these parts there's a shortage of good men to marry off. There are plenty of country bumpkins, hayseed farmers, layabouts, drunks, junkies, used car salesmen, egotistical fools, simpletons, morons, and ne'er-do-wells. But you're a smart guy with a good job and a big potential future. You're a war hero, which won't hurt with the local girls. You wouldn't cut the mustard up north or on the west coast, but around here, you're pure gold to the local girls. Your mom taught you good manners on top of it all. You're a handsome former athlete and soldier that'll make any healthy girl drool. Damn, if Bev hadn't snapped you up so quickly, I've got a nice niece in college I was planning to introduce you to when she comes home this summer." Indeed, Southern women during that era often viewed the world differently from their men. Like most men, I fell in love with the exterior packaging and forgot to look under the hood to see what makes this model tick. There was nothing inherently wrong with that, but there wasn't anything truly right about it either. Bev and I get along, do things together. The sex is great. We travel. But we're very different people. She's a social butterfly. She spends her days at the country club, playing tennis and golf with friends, enjoys parties, and immerses herself in the whirlwind of the social structure of our small southern town. I'm more of a loner, love reading, enjoy my technical work, which is of no interest to the general public, and often travel for work. It's all fine, but it's just not quite right. Bev is spoiled. The only daughter of the town's top lawyers, a woman who values the comforts and privileges that money can buy, and a lady with fierce pride. Any divorce with her would be contentious and very expensive, but if I can clearly prove marital infidelity, I can dictate the terms of the divorce and achieve a quiet, swift settlement. I'll just chalk this marriage up to experience. The next morning, my first stop was back in town. The bank was open on Saturday mornings, so I transferred all our money to new accounts. I canceled the credit cards in Bev's name and transferred all mutual funds to new accounts. That took care of what I could do on the financial end of the impending storm. I figured Bev would be preoccupied with her lover and wouldn't notice what I had done. Next, I stopped by the lawyer's office, whom I had met playing softball in the church league. He was also a Vietnam veteran and was glad to help. Over a couple of cups of coffee at his place, he briefed me briefly. Without the infidelity, I would have paid dearly for my freedom in this state. He also warned me that Bev's parents would be formidable opponents in the divorce battle. He explained that both of her parents were tough, ruthless, legal geniuses. I scheduled a meeting for 8 o'clock on Monday at my friend's office to kick off the official battle. My next stop was the library, where I did some reading on the state's divorce laws and requirements for evidence of marital infidelity. Based on this research and what my friend lawyer told me, essentially, I had to prove Bev's inclination and opportunity to commit adultery. I didn't necessarily need their picture at the scene of the crime, although that would certainly be icing on the cake. However, now that I knew about the infidelity, I also had to be careful not to do anything that Bev could claim facilitated the adultery. So going back home and pretending everything was okay wasn't the wisest option. I realized it was better to act now than later. I dropped by Bo's Army-Navy store. Bo was a Korean War veteran and collected all sorts of military stuff. His store was a veritable museum of military artifacts. In the back room, he kept many neat military toys that authorities frowned upon civilians owning. But to Bo, they were treasures. I bought a few items and spent a mandatory hour sipping coffee with Bo and swapping war stories. Finally, I swung by to see Jen, the wife of my best friend in town. We both played baseball together in college, and eventually, both ended up working in the lab. I kicked George, her husband, out of the room to talk to Jen alone. With some effort, I persuaded her to make 2 short recordings for me on my tape recorder. She was a smart girl, quickly figuring out the circumstances of my request and asking very insightful questions. I appealed to our long-standing friendship, swore her to secrecy, and promised to explain everything in a few days. I skipped lunch and was starving, so I grabbed a bite at Applebee's and mulled over my plan for the evening. I would have enjoyed a drink, but I preferred coffee to keep a clear head. I headed out and arrived at the edge of the woods on the opposite shore of the lake from my house a little after 4:30. As the sun set, I cautiously made my way into the deepening twilight of the ravine, crossed the stream, and slipped into the woods along the lake shore. I relieved myself in the ravine forest, as there's nothing worse than lying in wait or on a lookout and needing to go badly. I settled into the thicket of red oak at the edge of our yard, about 50 feet from the house. I was dressed in hunting camouflage, the usual local men's attire this time of year. And in the darkness, I was well hidden. I had binoculars and could see the kitchen window and the back porch roof, but nothing more. Around 5:30, Bev appeared in the kitchen and started working on dinner. A few minutes later, Ted showed up with drinks for them. It seemed like martinis with a couple of olives were their drink of choice tonight. They chatted animatedly for a few minutes, and then Ted left and reappeared on the porch again. He fired up my grill and went back into the kitchen to give my wife a quick kiss. After some teasing, she shooed him away with a plate of steaks. Ted returned with the cooked steaks, and they joked and teased each other while setting the plates. Overall, it was a very pleasant Norman Rockwell-esque scene. The only problem was that it was my wife and my house, but another man was enjoying them both. The mischievous couple vanished from the kitchen, undoubtedly to enjoy their steaks in the dining room. I slipped through the back door into the utility room, using my key to unlock the door. Bev keeps the sliding door to the kitchen closed, as the utility room is always too messy to be seen by the public eye. I cracked the door open. I could hear Bev and Ted talking, and it sounded like they were enjoying a romantic candlelit dinner. I proceeded to the garage, where I deflated the tires of Ted's truck. I have an electric air pump under the workbench. I disconnected the pump hose and tucked it into my backpack. Even if Ted thought to look for my pump, it would be useless now. His truck was temporarily stuck at my house, and his independent mobility was limited to his feet. Then I checked the phone in the garage, and it was working. We have a pantry that has doors to the utility room adjoining the kitchen and to the dining room where Bev and Ted were enjoying dinner. I slipped into the pantry from the utility room and crouched next to the door to the dining room. I could hear the adulterers' conversation and as clearly as if I were sitting with them at the same table. Ted said, "You picked great steaks. I love this wine too. I didn't know John was into wines. Always thought of him as a beer-drinking jock." Bev laughed. "Oh, you underestimate John. After we got married, he learned I love wine and became quite the connoisseur to please me. Don't kid yourself, this guy's a smart cookie. Yesterday, I heard some gossip at the club that he'll be sent back to the lab for grad school next year. He doesn't know it yet. Sometimes John can be clueless." Well, at least that's some good news, I thought. "Where do you think he'll be heading?" Ted asked. "Probably back to Texas A&M. There's a professor he really likes there, and they've stayed in touch," my wife replied. "Are you going with him? To Austin? Do I look like a shepherd? It's just a year for coursework and then defending the dissertation in the lab. I'll stay here and keep house like a good little homemaker." Bev chuckled. "It could be a very exciting year for you without your husband around. Does he suspect you're cheating on him?" "John? No. He's just a simple country boy, bless his heart. I make sure he's thoroughly entertained in bed, and he's consumed with his work, which goes beyond anything I understand. Between his workload and travels, I can easily indulge myself whenever I crave some masculine variety in my life." "I'm looking forward to next year," Ted said slyly. "But I won't be alone, right?" My wife laughed. "Of course not, Ted. I like a buffet, not a diet. You do realize I've been doing this with you longer than with John?" "I suppose that's true," Ted said cheerfully. Bev laughed even louder. "Oh Lord, remember that time my parents came home early and caught us naked on the couch? I thought Dad was going to have a stroke." Ted joined in the laughter ruefully. "How could I ever forget? I'd only been working for your folks for about a year then. There I was, sleeping with their married daughter right in their living room. As I recall, your husband had just left for Vietnam a week ago. I was sure I was about to get fired, if not killed." "Oh, that would have been the case, but Mama intervened and saved your hide. I knew some kind of miracle happened." "Pour me another glass of wine," Bev continued, "and I'll tell you the rest of the story." A minute later, my giggling wife resumed her tale. The next day, my mom took me out to lunch at the club. There, she gave me a crash course on marital infidelity. She pointed out my mistakes that got us caught, explained the laws surrounding infidelity, emphasized the necessity of caution and meticulous planning to avoid detection, and told me about a bunch of methods and good spots for secret rendezvous. "You must be joking," exclaimed Ted. "Nope. Turns out Mom was cheating on Dad even before they got married, and it was all about science. She said her mother was the same way. Hard to believe that's Grandma. She always seemed so unapproachable and strict. It's difficult to imagine her lifting her skirts for every man she fancied. Anyway, it seems I'm the latest in a long family line of serial adulterers. I guess women in my family just love variety and get a thrill from risk and mischief." It's a real family legacy. I could hear the amusement in Bev's voice when she asked, "Okay, Ted, I have to ask. Have you ever slept with my mom?" Do I really have to answer that question?" Bev laughed. "No, I can guess the answer. There may be some truth to that," Ted replied surreptitiously. "Ah, so you enjoyed it with your mother and daughter too, tooting your horns at my father, my late husband, and now my current husband. My, what a depraved creature you are. No wonder we get along so well. I certainly learned a lot about my wife tonight." I had no idea. Bev continued her interrogation. "What about your wife? Does Charlie suspect anything? You know, we went to high school and college together and even lived together for a while. She's a smart girl, much smarter than you. I always wondered why she married you." Ted grimly replied, "Oh, things have been a bit tense at home lately. Yeah, Charlie is suspicious, but I'm cautious and not as active as you are." Ted continued, "I think the future of my marriage with Charlie doesn't look promising. But I have to be smart about how to get out of this with my skin intact in such a state. I've met Ted's wife, Charlie, well, technically Charlene, a few times at parties and at the club. She was attractive and, as Bev said, very smart. Often the intelligence of a beautiful woman is overlooked because of her appearance. But if you talk to Charlie, it's immediately clear that she's very sharp. I've always enjoyed her company. What about you? Are you planning to stay with John? Oh God, yes, Bev replied. He's exactly what I need in a husband. I truly love him. I just don't stay faithful to him. We're talking about eventually having kids. He's excellent genetic material for that and would be a great father. No, he's a keeper. Ted remarked. Bev, you like the finer things in life. I always imagined you'd marry a wealthy man, not a government research engineer. You need someone who will support you in the style you're accustomed to. Well, John does a decent job already. Mom and Dad are wealthy and they give me money. They've always been good at spoiling their only daughter. Plus, there's the trust fund from Grandma and Grandpa they left me. Altogether, it's a nice financial package. I always suspected my relatives were giving Bev money, but a trust fund, that's news to me. Bev changed the subject. All this talk about marital infidelity is intriguing to me. The wine and steaks are gone. I'll take the plates to the kitchen. How about pouring us some brandy? Damn, I wish they'd stop drinking my good liquor. I heard Bev scrape the plates into the trash can and place them in the sink as she slipped back into the pantry. Ted reappeared in the dining room with 2 glasses of my brandy, and they indulged in a long kiss while I watched them through the slightly ajar door. Ted's hands were wandering, but she seemed to be okay with it. When they broke the kiss to catch their breath, Bev exhaled. Let's go to the study and finish our brandy. They disappeared out of sight towards the den. I heard faint sounds and happy moans emanating from the den, but the adulterers were out of my line of sight. About 20 minutes later, my wife and Ted, both now unclothed, hurried down the corridor I could see towards our bedroom. Soon, a cacophony of laughter and joyful squeals echoed from our bedroom. The adulterous lovers were hard at work. Now was the hour of D, and it was time to move. I stepped into the garage and made my first phone call. The phone rang twice, then Charlie answered. Hello? I scrolled through the first recording from Jen on the phone. Hey, Charlie. It's your friend. Ted is having an affair with Bev. You'll find them both at her house right now. What? Charlie stuttered in response. I hung up and called the fire department dispatch. They picked up on the first ring, and I played the second recording from Jen. Hurry, please. House on Magnolia Drive, number 8 is on fire. Smoke's pouring out, and there are people inside. I hung up as soon as the recording finished. I needed to act fast. I probably had no more than 5 or 6 minutes before the firefighters and Charlie showed up at the front door. I switched on the tactical red flashlight I bought at the Bow store. I grabbed a metal trash can from the garage and placed it in the kitchen. Then I hurried to the front door, switched on the porch and garage exterior lights, and dashed back to the study. On a whim, I grabbed the scattered clothes of my wife and Ted and tossed them into the pantry. I pulled out a gas mask from my backpack, also from Bo. Damn, that military training sticks with you. Then I retrieved 2 smoke grenades and a canister of CS tear gas from my stash of unofficial and illegal Bo military toys. With my tasks completed, I retreated to the pantry and waited. Out of petty spite, I took Ted's driver's license and credit cards from his wallet and stashed them in my pocket. I'd destroy them later, just to make Ted suffer the inconvenience of replacing them. He slept with my wife right there in the hallway, so a little pettiness on my part seemed justified. The smoke grenades and tear gas canister hissed and released a dense cloud of smoke and tear gas, quickly filling the kitchen, then spilling into the adjacent dining room and study. Military tear gas actually consists of aerosol dispersion of fine powder rather than real gas. Despite this subtle difference, the smoke alarms in the kitchen started blaring, and the one at the entrance to the hallway leading to the bedrooms quickly followed suit. The wail of the alarm elicited surprised exclamations from my wife and Ted. I heard them rushing down the hallway from the bedroom. "My God, something's burning in the kitchen!" my wife cried out. They reached the kitchen door before the tear gas descended upon them. At one moment, they were okay and lunged forward to put out the fire. The next moment, they doubled over, gasping and coughing, screaming in pain, rubbing their eyes, exacerbating the burning sensation. Tears streamed freely. Tear gas is a vile and ruthless enemy. Ted shouted, "The smoke's toxic. Get out, get out." He gallantly ushered my wife towards the entrance door. "I'll grab our clothes." During the Vietnam War-era draft, Ted had some kind of deferment, so he never served in the military. Consequently, he didn't recognize the effects of tear gas like any military veteran would. I heard Ted struggling in the smoke-filled den, futilely trying to find their clothes, which were now neatly folded in the pantry next to me. After a few seconds, the tear gas became too strong, and he followed my wife to the entrance door. In the distance, I heard the wail of the fire brigade sirens and hurried to the study. I quickly scattered my wife's and Ted's clothes around the room again. I tossed my wife's panties to hang them on the top part of the ceiling light for a good view. It would take a ladder to take down Bev's panties. The first lights of the fire trucks were flashing in the front window, so it was time for me to leave. I ran back to the kitchen, put on insulated gloves, and grabbed the metal trash can with tear gas canisters. I exited through the back door of the pantry, locking it behind me, and ran into the woods. Passing by the lake, I stopped to throw the still smoking smoke grenades and tear gas canister as far as I could into the lake, then ran back to my truck. It was only 8 o'clock. Then I drove back to the hunting camp, tossing the metal trash can into a dumpster along the way from town. Unfortunately, I couldn't be in front of my house to witness the results of my Machiavellian machinations, so later, others who were present relayed the following to me. I could only enjoy the events indirectly. The firefighters and Charlie, Ted's wife, arrived simultaneously, followed by a growing crowd of curious neighbors drawn by the sirens and lights. Smoke with tear gas poured out from the open front door. The outdoor lighting I had turned on illuminated the bizarre scene. My wife was on all fours, retching. Ted bent over her, hands on his knees, breathing deeply. Both were naked as newborns. Charlie approached Ted, who straightened up as she neared. Without a word, she kicked him. This elicited a cry of pain from him and a collective gasp from the watching crowd of neighbors. Ted collapsed with a groan to the ground next to Bev. Charlie stood over him and unleashed a torrent of curses, something no one expected to hear from such a composed Southern lady as her. A firefighter grabbed Charlie and pulled her away from Bev and Ted, who were still gasping, coughing, and crying. Charlie continued to verbally tear into Ted from a distance. A sheriff's deputy arrived to take charge of keeping Charlie and Ted apart. One group of firefighters made their way to the front door in search of the source of the smoke. Another team circled around the back of the house and broke into the rear door of the utility room to approach the fire from the other side. Due to the dense smoke, the firefighters were wearing breathing apparatus, so they didn't realize that the smoke cloud contained tear gas. A second fire truck arrived, along with 2 more sheriff's department vehicles. My neighbors watched in both awe and concern. Somewhere along the line, a kind Samaritan brought blankets for Bev and Ted to cover their public nudity. Purely by chance, a local television crew was on scene filming the aftermath of a highway accident about 2 miles from my house. They were wrapping up when they heard the fire department and police calls on the scanner about a fire at my house. They rushed straight to me to join the party in my front yard. There were probably about 50 neighbors standing around, gawking. The morning news on TV the next day featured an excellent segment showing the crowd watching the smoke billowing from the house as the firefighters came and went. The highlight was when they showed a shot of my wife and Ted, wrapped in blankets and staring blankly at the smoking house. Finally, one of the firefighters came out and told the incident commander, "No fire. Lots of very acrid smoke, but we can't find any flames. Jim Bob's up in the attic right now, but we're not seeing any charring." The incident commander suggested to Ted and Bev that they shouldn't stay in the house until it had been thoroughly checked for electrical or gas issues. Bev said, "I'll go to my parents," ignoring our neighbors and their offers of help. Bev went into the house, quickly dressed in the bedroom, and left in her BMW. Ted nodded and said, "I guess I'll head to the Holiday Inn." The sheriff dryly added, "Probably wise." Ted was slower than Bev, as he had to gather his scattered clothes. When he tried to back his truck out of the garage, he found out about the 2 flat tires. His truck was halfway stuck in the garage, halfway out. Eventually, one of the neighbors took pity on him and gave him a ride to the Holiday Inn. Ted found himself with no credit cards and only $25 in cash. He called Bev, who provided the Holiday Inn clerk with her credit card over the phone, only to find out that her credit card had been canceled. Finally, Bev's father had to intervene and give his personal card over the phone before Ted could secure a room for the night. My wife and her lover were very unhappy people. I went straight back to the hunting camp and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up before dawn and headed out to a remote deer stand. It took me some time to hide the gas mask, flashlight, and gloves deep in the woods. After that, I idled away the hours and didn't return to the farm until almost noon. Sure enough, there was a stranger sitting on my porch. He was a thin, elderly man with graying hair. As I approached, the stranger said, "Hello, you must be John." "Yes," I replied. "John, my name's Jimmy. I'm with the arson investigation unit in the fire department." I looked at him questioningly. "Something strange happened at your house last night. There was a fire there." I interrupted him, pretending to be concerned. "Was Bev injured? How serious is the damage?" No, everything's fine. The funny thing about this fire, there was a lot of smoke, but even looking this morning in daylight, we can't find any signs of a fire." "Smoke, but no fire? I'm not sure I understand," I replied, trying to appear puzzled. Jimmy sighed. "Neither am I. Been doing this for 20 years and never seen anything like it." I just stood there, looking appropriately perplexed. "I mentioned that your wife and the neighbor, Ted, were overcome by smoke. It happened right in front of the whole neighborhood. Firefighters, sheriff's department, and TV reporters, not to mention Ted's wife." I shook my head. "No, you didn't mention that," I said, suppressing a smirk. "You don't seem surprised that your wife is fooling around with your neighbor." Now it was my turn to sigh. "Well, if you've ever seen my wife in her birthday suit, you know she's a sight to behold. Any husband with a wife like mine knows there's always a chance she'll flirt when he's not looking. Sad, but it's a fact of life." Jimmy nodded. "Yeah, that's true. Like they say in that old song. Something like, if you want to be happy for the rest of your life, never make a pretty woman your wife." "Seems like there's some wisdom in that," I agreed. "It's a curious thing with the symptoms your wife and Ted exhibited. Sure seems like they got hit with some tear gas or something. Firefighters said the smoke was pretty strong." "Tear gas, huh? Seems unlikely. Yeah, it's illegal to have that stuff in this state unless you're a cop or military." I didn't respond. "You know, only you and Ted's wife, Charlie, would have a motive to pull something like airing out your marital affairs for all to see with tear gas. Quite an interesting plan." I responded slowly. "Well, I was up at the hunting lodge since Friday noon." Jimmy ignored my offered alibi and continued. "Talked to Charlie this morning before I came over. Now, she's quite the firecracker, isn't she?" "Yeah, definitely," I agreed. "Charlie says she's had her doubts about her husband's fidelity, but didn't know anything for sure. Says a woman called her and said her husband was at your house with your wife. Young woman in her 20s or so, southern accent, good diction, probably well-educated. But Charlie didn't recognize the voice. This call came right before the so-called fire. That's what brought Charlie and the rest of your neighbors over just in time to see your naked wife bolt out of the house." Jimmy waited for me to respond. "So if Ted, or for that matter your wife, were shot, stabbed, or poisoned, Charlie would be the prime suspect as the perpetrator," I stated. Jimmy pursed his lips thoughtfully. "But this operation was smooth, meticulously planned down to the last detail and executed with precision. Charlie's not that kind of woman. Hell, she'd just drag you out and stab you in the forehead eye to eye, and then she'd twist the knife. She's not the type to spend time maneuvering to stab you in the back." "Yeah, I see that," I agreed. "But you're a guy, smart, military, efficient combat leader, engineer. On the other hand, you're exactly the person who knows how to do it, how to plan it, and then actually pull it off," he continued. I shrugged. "What can I say? I was there at the lodge hunting." Jimmy wearily smiled. "Oh yeah, your alibi. I swung by the main lodge before coming to see you. Gossip in this county is incredible. They all knew everything about this whole thing. They all swear they saw you at the lodge all weekend. Henry, in fact, swears that yesterday around 8 in the evening, he was sure you two were drinking beer together. Right around 8 is when the so-called fire started. John, you have good friends and they really like you, but please tell them from me that they damn well better not be lying, he said. He continued, interestingly, the fire department dispatcher who received the call about the fire at your house said that a woman called them too. Their description of the woman sounded just like Charlie. In both cases, the woman delivered her speech without asking questions and hung up. You could almost think they were recordings. Jimmy watched me for a minute, then continued his monologue. You know, I can run some tests, and I'm sure I'll find traces of tear gas in your house. I can fill out a bunch of paperwork and find out which number Charlie and the firefighters called last night. It could be interesting. This morning I found men's footprints by the lake behind your house, about your size, I'd say. I suspect that if I dive the lake, I'll find a few tear gas canisters. I bet if I check military surplus stores, I might find records of some interesting recent purchases. Not tear gas, of course, since that's illegal, but maybe things like gas masks that could be useful for this. Damn, this Jimmy ain't no fool, I thought to myself. I enjoyed dealing with a mastermind. Jimmy stood up and stretched. But money's tight these days. I've got a whole pile of crap cases to investigate. There was no property damage, no one got hurt, and anyway, it's your own property. It would take a whole month of government lawyers working Sundays just to figure out if a crime was even committed, if there was one at all. I think it's not worth spending the money and time on this. Jimmy sighed deeply. But I just wouldn't want anyone to think they got away with something when they didn't. Well, I've got a long drive back to town, so I better get going. I shouted as Jimmy headed to his car. Thanks, Jimmy. Message received 5 out of 5. Jimmy turned around and smiled, recognizing the old military radio terminology. That was a good plan, Captain. Mission accomplished. Now don't waste any more time on it. Keep living your life. Jimmy got into his car and drove back to town. I quickly gathered my things and headed back to my house. Hunting season for me was over this year. I stopped by to explain to George and Jen what I had promised her for making the recordings. They had seen the news clip about the fire, which turned out not to be a fire. They recognized Bev, but not Ted, and easily put 2 and 2 together. It took some time to satisfy Jen's curiosity and thirst for every detail. George just sat there, shaking his head and occasionally laughing. I thanked Jen again for her help and went home, not looking forward to dealing with Bev soon. When I got home, I found out that Ted had somehow retrieved his truck, and there was a blinking message indicator on the phone. Bev had been calling about every hour since 7 in the morning. Essentially, the messages were like, John, I'm at my parents' house. Call me as soon as you get this message. As the day went on, she became more and more irritated, and expressions like, damn it, John, where are you? We need to talk, and please talk to me before doing anything, started appearing in the recorded messages. I really didn't want to deal with Bev right now, so I ignored the messages. I skipped lunch again and was peering into the fridge, contemplating making a sandwich, when the doorbell rang. I opened the door and saw Charlie standing there with a crooked smile. Charlie was usually a very composed and cheerful lady. Today she just looked tired and worn out. She said, Hi, John. I suppose by now you know all about last night. Yeah, I replied. Good. Then I won't have to explain it again, she said, smiling, which made her look more like herself. We're in the same boat, you and I. Invite me in and offer me a drink. We have things to talk about. Come in, Charlie. What would you like to drink? Somehow, Charlie's audacious self-invitation lifted me out of my funk. How about a glass of wine? She replied. White or red? I have Italian Pinot Grigio or Oregon Pinot Noir. How about the Pinot Grigio? Take a seat in the study. I'll bring you the wine. I heard giggling from the study. When I joined her with the wine, I found Charlie smiling, looking at Bev's panties still hanging from the chandelier. The rest of Bev's clothes from last night were still scattered on the floor. Is that from Bev? She chuckled, pointing at the panties. I nodded. Charlie laughed, took the wine and sat down. Are you going to leave them there? like a permanent decoration, trophy, or something of the sort. Then she added more somberly, maybe at the moment it's more akin to a monk wearing a hair shirt for self-flagellation. Charlie sighed, and her temporary good mood vanished. How long have you known about them? Since Friday evening, when I returned early from the hunting camp and found Ted's pickup truck in the garage. Did you know or suspect anything? Charlie shook her head sadly. Well, at least you're 24 hours ahead of me in the enlightenment process. I suspected Ted of cheating about a year after we got married, but I never had any real evidence, or even enough to do much more than make me wonder if I was being paranoid. Clearly, my instincts were right. Afraid so, I added. You know, Bev and I have been close friends since high school. I just can't believe that she, of all people, could do this. Charlie was silent for a minute, then continued with a cynical laugh. Actually, I guess I shouldn't be surprised. How much do you really know about your wife and her infidelities? I found out a few things since Friday, but I probably only know the tip of the iceberg. Charlie smiled sadly. Well, Bev has always been a liar. Even in high school and college, she cheated on her pilot husband, even while he was fighting in Vietnam. And she cheated on you, probably every time you left town. I think Bev thrives on danger and the thrill of it, flaunting conventions, indulging in forbidden fruit or something of the sort. It seems she just can't help herself. Charlie turned to look me straight in the eye. Are you going to take her back? No, I have a meeting with a lawyer tomorrow at 8 in the morning. Charlie sighed with relief. Good. One of the reasons I came to talk to you was to tell you not to take her back. You deserve better from a wife. You nailed her for adultery, no hesitation. She's a fantastic woman and can charm the pants off any man. Charlie wagged her finger at me for emphasis. But don't you dare take her back. I smiled at my lecturing neighbor. I won't. Trust me. How about you, Charlie? Taking Ted back? Not on your life. I'd castrate him if I could get away with it. I smiled, remembering what Jimmy had said earlier at the camp about Charlie's fierceness. Would you like to come with me tomorrow morning and meet with my lawyer? We're essentially dealing with the same case. It might make sense to use the same attorney. Charlie smiled. You're running faster than I am. Yes, I'd love to go with you. Let's get this thing started. I'll pick you up tomorrow morning at 7:30, I suggested. The meeting is at 8. Agreed. There was a pause and Charlie changed the subject. John, the whole thing on Saturday night was odd. I talked to an arson investigator. His name was Jimmy or something like that. Saturday night wasn't an accident, was it? You were behind all that? I paused for a moment. There was no longer any legal threat from Jimmy. Now Charlie was an ally in the upcoming divorce wars. Why not? So I detailed the events, which at times elicited bursts of laughter. It was nice to share this story with someone. There's nothing amusing about pulling off a complex operation and then not having the chance to brag about it afterward, bragging to an admiring pretty woman. Now that's much better. As I reached the parts about Bev and Ted's infidelity, Charlie was skeptical. He slept with Bev's mom to get a promotion. Amazing, but I guess typical. Bev's mom and grandma were in on it too. I know them both. Well, I thought I did. Bev's mom was giving Bev advice on how to commit adultery. I just can't believe it. When I told Charlie about Ted sleeping with Bev on their wedding day, Charlie exploded. You didn't know Bev was my maid of honor? Damn her! Our therapeutic bitch session was beneficial for both of us and lifted our spirits. It was a cathartic experience, and we forged a new friendship, sharing our woes. We also polished off a whole bottle of wine, which probably didn't hurt either. The phone rang. It's Bev, no doubt. I grimaced. Charlie answered. She won't stop. Might as well deal with her now as later. I picked up the receiver and put it on speaker so my new divorce ally could hear. I said neutrally, Hello? John, I've been desperately trying to reach you. I'm coming over now. We need to talk, darling. Bev, there's nothing to talk about. Don't come to me. Listen, John, I can explain. I have a lot to answer for, darling. But, Bev, you're a liar. Why continue this farce? We're done. Charlie gave me a thumbs up. Listen, John, please, I know you're upset. Bev cooed in a soothing voice. And you have every right to be angry. I'll make amends with you. Let me come over and explain everything. We'll go to counseling. We can make this work. No, I have a meeting with a lawyer tomorrow. We're done. You go your way and I'll go mine. No mutual accusations. Another thumbs up from Charlie. Since persuasion and pleas didn't work, Bev switched gears as smoothly as a Porsche changing lanes. She went on the attack. Fine, you pathetic asshole. My dad will represent me. He's the best lawyer in the state. He'll tear your lawyer a new one. I calmly replied, your father is a very good lawyer. However, does he know about the long history of marital infidelity involving your mom? Like your mom and Ted? There was dead silence on the other end of the line, probably for about 30 seconds. You bugged our house, she shrieked. No, I didn't bug the house. You couldn't have known otherwise. Then it dawned on her. Sorry, Peeping Tom, you were in the house eavesdropping on us. You orchestrated all this. Damn you. She choked up with realization. You threw my panties on the chandelier. I know I left them on the end table. I had to walk out naked, wrapped in a blanket, past those giggling firefighters with my panties dangling over their heads. Damn your sorry soul, you humiliated me in front of the whole town. I calmly replied, no, Bev. You humiliated yourself in front of the whole town. I heard you and Ted even made the morning news. Defeat seeped into her. I held the winning hand and didn't blink. She said, let your lawyer talk to my dad. At least we can be civil. Then she hung up. Charlie laughed and melodically sang, you've got to know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em, know when to walk away, and know when to run. Then Charlie said thoughtfully, wow, I hope Ted is as reasonable. I'm sure he won't be. Well, I need to head home. My mom's coming over to check up on me. How are you feeling? I asked. Better. Much better. Thanks for talking to me. I escorted Charlie to the door and held it open for her. She turned, tiptoed, and kissed me. Slowly and more intimately at first as I responded to her kiss. Finally, she broke the kiss and said, phew, I've wanted to do that since I first met you. Do you want to come over for dinner tomorrow night? Sure, I replied. How many times do you think they fucked each other? Charlie asked. I really don't know. I think a lot, judging by the way they talked. Well then, I guess we better start counting points tomorrow night. Come ready to work for dinner. With those words, Charlie headed to her car with the bold grace only women can possess.